An extensive account of Francisco Franco's life implies telling the history of a complex conflict and a whole nation for more than 40 years. So we're going to skip some chunks in today's video. If you think we've missed an important event, please do post your suggestion in the comment below and make sure that you name the protagonist or protagonists of these events, and we might consider them for future videos. Francisco Franco Bahamonde was born on the 4th of December 1892 in the town of El Ferrol in northwestern Spain. He had two brothers and one sister, born into a family that for generations had served the once glorious Spanish Navy. Sister Pilar described him as very quiet and a serious boy, physically very thin. In his childhood, Francisco had two obsessions: his studies and his mother, with whom he had a very tight relationship. Francisco's mother, Maria de Pilar, was an austere and devout woman who imbued Francisco with a deep faith in religion and in the importance of the church in Spanish society. His father was more interested in alcohol and extramarital affairs, a lifestyle which Franco perceived as debauched and he actively avoided throughout his life. In 1898, the once mighty Spanish Empire was reduced to a handful of colonies following the defeat in the Hispano-American War, which cost them Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. The remnants of the defeated Spanish fleet returned to El Ferrol, marking a period of mourning for the whole community, and especially for the 6-year-old. This may have instilled in him a desire to restore the glory of the empire. The other effect of the destruction of the fleet was a decline in available spots for the Naval Academy for several years. The Navy would have been Francisco's natural destination, but he had to settle for an army career instead. In 1906, aged 14, Francisco enlisted in the Toledo Army Academy. The new cadet was so small, his voice so shrill, that he quickly became victim of the Academy's bullies. His frame was so frail that the instructors had to modify his training rifle to make it lighter to carry. Francisco made up for his physical shortcomings with determination and hard work, although he did not display particular leadership qualities. He graduated in 1910, modestly placed 251 out of 312 cadets. The Spanish military, it was saturated with officers at that time, and opportunities for career progression were scarce. In 1912, Francisco took the calculated move of volunteering for a post in Spanish Morocco, the last colony, in the hopes of progressing through the army's ranks. His experiences in Africa would be key to shaping his later life. He later declared, "Without Africa, I could not explain who I am." The Kingdom of Spain was engaged in a brutal colonial war against the rebel tribes of the Rift Mountain Range. In this conflict, Lieutenant Franco displayed qualities so far kept hidden: tenacity and physical courage. Lieutenant Franco was in charge of a company of Moroccan colonial troops that were loyal to the Spanish crown. He was able to maintain a ruthless discipline amongst his soldiers, even when under heavy enemy fire. On one occasion, one of his troops refused to eat his rations and threw them at another officer. Franco had him executed by firing squad. It is alleged that he applied this ruthlessness also against civilians, using terror tactics to quell the rebellion. The officers of the Spanish army in Africa at that time were nicknamed Novios de la Muerte, which can be translated as the grooms or boyfriends of Lady Death. This was because of the high casualty rates amongst their ranks. Franco apparently disregarded the fear of death, often leading from the front with almost suicidal attacks against entrenched rebels. In 1917, Franco had already been promoted to major and was ordered back to Spain to break a strike of coal miners in the northern region of Asturias. During his stay in Oviedo, the capital of the region, he got engaged with Carmen Polo. This was despite opposition from her family of wealthy merchants. Back to Morocco in 1918, on the 28th of June, he was shot in the stomach, an almost certain appointment with Lady Death. While bleeding out on a stretcher, he called out to a doctor, but he was refused treatment. According to the doctor, it would have been futile. Franco then grabbed a rifle and pointed it at the doctor, threatening to shoot him if he was not treated. The medic changed his mind and had him evacuated to a field hospital. Against all odds, he fully recovered. The native troops followed him with blind loyalty after that. In October of 1920, Franco was second in command of the Tercio de Extremeños, the Spanish Foreign Legion recently founded by Lieutenant Colonel Milan Astre. Milan introduced as such the credo of the Tercio. Death in combat is the greatest honor. You die only once. Death arrives without pain and is not so terrible as it seems. The most horrible thing is to live as a coward. The Tercio became known for its effectiveness, courage, and brutality. One of Franco's soldiers described as such their operations. When it attacked, the Tercio knew no limits to its vengeance. When it left a village, nothing remained but fires and the corpses of men, women, and children. In 1923, Franco became commander of the Tercio, shining for his strategic and administrative ability. On the 23rd of October, he married Carmen in Oviedo with a representative of King Alfonso XIII present at the wedding. They would have only one daughter, Carmencita, born the following year. After 14 years of service in Morocco, the once mediocre lieutenant had progressed so quickly that he returned to Spain a brigadier general. Aged 33, he was the youngest general in Europe since Napoleon. He had also become something of a celebrity, frequenting elite circles and even starring as himself in the movie La Malcasada of 1926. This curious film, dealing with a real-life divorce case, featured many intellectuals, politicians, and military leaders of the time. Starring alongside Franco could also be seen Old Commander Milan Astre, who would later become nationalist propaganda chief during the Civil War, and even Miguel Primo de Rivera, who was ruling Spain as a military dictator from 1923 with the blessing of the king. Franco's celebrity status and Carmen's connections gave him access to the most elite in Spain, but he did not enjoy their pleasures. He preferred to relish the traditional and austere values that he had learned from his mother, which he imparted to his cadets at the military academy in Zaragoza. But despite his best efforts for a return to tradition, Spanish society was changing around the young general. From the bottom up, Spanish society was shaken by the rise of leftist movements opposing the traditional pillars of the monarchy, the Catholic Church, and the owners of large estates. At the top, Primo de Rivera's dictatorship was failing due to his ill-conceived economic policies, resulting in high taxation, unsustainable public debt, and rising inflation. He was forced to resign in January of 1930. In 1931, Alfonso XIII agreed to democratic elections, which saw the victory of the left. In April, the king abdicated. The Spanish Republic was founded, and a new constitution was ratified. According to Franco's niece, this was a personal catastrophe for him, as he did not believe in democracy nor in a multi-party system. But the new government was a fragile one, and in November of 1933 it was replaced by a conservative coalition who appointed General Franco as commander-in-chief of the army. The left continued to cause civil unrest, though. In 1934, another massive strike of coal miners in Asturias took place. Franco was tasked with restoring order in the area. He commanded the Tercio to take charge of the strikers. 2,000 protesters were killed or wounded, many more deported to Morocco. But his actions had the unintended consequence of rallying the left-wing parties into a strong coalition called the People's Front. In February of 1936, new elections were convened. This time it was the leftist People's Front who secured a victory. The new government ensured the conservative generals were not close to a seat of power. Franco was dispatched to Tenerife in the Canary Islands, 2,000 kilometers from Madrid. The government kept close tabs on him by wiretapping his phone and checking his mail. In the meantime, unrest and violence were spiraling out of control in the country. The supporters of the leftist government soon gave way to excesses, especially against Catholic institutions. Churches were being burned and priests were murdered. Behind the scenes, a group of generals was plotting a military coup. Franco did not get involved at this stage, coldly calculating the risks involved. The leaders of the plot were two generals, Señora and Mola. Mola, the chief planner of the coup, had a scheme to involve Franco in the Banda Nacional, or nationalist forces. The plan involved dispatching a plane from London to the Canaries to then smuggle Franco into Morocco, where he would leave the Tercio to join the insurrection. While the plane was flying to Gran Canaria on the 11th of July, Franco sent an encrypted message to Mola refusing to participate in the coup. But on the 13th, right-wing politician Calvo Sotelo was murdered by the Republican police, which gave to the insurgents the motivation to proceed with their plans at all costs. Franco, who was finally convinced, on July the 19th of 1936, he travelled in civilian disguise to the Moroccan colony. The African army, numbering 30,000, swore loyalty to Franco into his cause. But how could he ferry such an army all the way to Spain when the navy was loyal to the Republic and was patrolling the Straits of Gibraltar? This is when he secured help from fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. The Italian and German air forces came to help Franco. By organizing 800 flights, they managed to ferry his forces to mainland Spain. The hopes of the insurgents for a quick resolution of the coup did not materialize. What had just started was the long and bloody conflict, the Spanish Civil War. The insurgents also had a leadership problem. Their commander, General Señora, had died in a plane crash on the 20th of July, being replaced by a military junta only formerly led by the elder General Cabanillas. In the meanwhile, Franco had reached Seville and quickly led his army northwards, facing only the resistance of civilians. His African army soon reached Badajoz near the Portuguese border. After reaching the city, Franco embarked in a political cleansing of the area. As witnessed by Portuguese journalist Maria Neves, hundreds of prisoners were rounded up in the local bullfighting ring and executed by firing squad. Franco continued his march towards Madrid, but in September he ordered a diversion to Toledo, south of the capital. In Toledo, a small garrison of nationalists was besieged by the Republican army inside the Alcazar, the castle which housed the very military academy in which young Francisco graduated. Franco's army defeated the Republicans, but he only joined them the following day, the 27th of September, in full view of the news cameras. He had realized that this was more of a PR event than a simple military victory. Toledo was not only home to the military academy, it was also the religious capital of Spain. By appearing as the liberator of Toledo, Franco had portrayed himself as the defender of Spanish traditional institutions. One traditional institution that you don't want to defend is the prices at boutique eyewear shops. Not a great thing, but that was a great transition into today's sponsor, Warby Parker, who I want to tell you. Try on. Let's get back to today's video. On the same evening, Francisco traveled to the city of Cáceres. Here, General Milan Astre and General Iago announced that now the whole nationalist army was under the sole command of General Franco. So far, Francisco had been leading only the African army in the south, while General Mola was in command in the north. All of the generals, except for the old Calaneas, thought that a unified leadership would improve their war efforts. Franco was one of the candidates, but he was not sure about taking the mantle. It was thanks to the scheming of his own brother, Nicolas, that he eventually accepted. Nicolas first pressured Yagüe into convincing Francisco to lead all armies. Yagüe issued a vague threat to Franco. If he didn't accept the role, the junta would appoint somebody else. Nicolas also orchestrated a meeting of 8 leading generals, including Franco, in Salamanca on the 28th of September 1936. The purpose of the meeting was to decide whether to concentrate on one single person, both military and political leadership of the Spanish state during the Civil War. Except for 2 generals, everybody voted for Franco to be the leader of the Spanish state, a term which indicated the nationalist-controlled territory. Franco now had become the generalissimo of all armed forces and head of the government. He took on the title of Caudillo, an ancient style for leader. In theory, he only had a mandate for the duration of the war, but Nicolas cleverly redacted the official bulletin bearing this decision so that this time limitation was omitted. The Franco brothers had outsmarted the other generals, a real coup within a coup, which ensured total power for life to the once reluctant insurgent. By October of 1936, nationalist forces were in control of roughly 1/3 of Spanish territory, mainly in the west and north of the country. But Madrid, it was still out of Franco's reach, despite intensive air and artillery bombings. At this time, the Republican government secured support from Stalin. Now every side of the conflict could rely on help from powerful dictatorships. This war would not spare civilians. It was a total war in which many of the horrific tactics of World War II would be tested. Atrocities were perpetrated on a massive scale on both sides. Franco and the other generals enacted a policy of purging captured cities following the example of Badajoz. The Republicans were also active in executing members of the clergy, national prisoners, nationalist sympathizers, and even themselves as a result of infighting among disparate factions, most notably in Catalonia. It is estimated that by the end of the war, the nationalists had executed 75,000 people compared to 55,000 murdered by the Republicans. In February 1937, Franco attempted to take Madrid by frontal assault in the Battle of Yarana River, but he was stopped by the international brigades of foreign volunteers. It is interesting to note that 5,000 Germans and 3,000 Italians fought against Franco, joining the international brigades in support of the Republic. These brigades were 60,000 strong at their peak. In March, Franco approached the capital from the northeast, capturing Guadalajara first. An Italian corps took the city and then moved quickly to Madrid, but were repelled by a Republican and Soviet tank counterattack. Operations progressed for the nationalists in the north. In August 1937, they captured the northern stronghold of Santander with help from Italian Regular Army and Black Shirts. This helped consolidate their territories in the north. In the meantime, the German Condor Legion and the Fascist Air Force had been perpetrating the first large carpet bombings of civilian targets over Durango, Barcelona, Madrid, and most notably Guernica on the 26th of April 1937. But all in all, despite decisive support from his allies, Franco's progress was slow. German leadership was frustrated by this and suspected it was a calculated move on his side. Franco's strategy was to firmly consolidate his own political power before advancing on new territories. The situation for the Republicans became dire in the second half of 1938. In July, they engaged the Nationalists in a protracted battle on the river Ebro in the northeast. It lasted 113 days and claimed more than 13,000 casualties on both sides. Nationalists, 600,000 strong, could take the hit, but the Republicans less so. In September of 1938, the international brigades withdrew from Spain, while Mussolini sent even more aircraft and artillery to Franco. On the 26th of January 1939, Barcelona fell to the Nationalists. The president of the Republic, Manuel Azaña, fled to France. On the 27th of February, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was the first European democratic leader to recognize Franco's government as legitimate. On the same day, Azaña resigned, and by the 1st of April, all Republican forces had capitulated. That was the end of the war. 500,000 people had died, 2% of the total Spanish population. But the death toll wasn't going to stop there. As sole ruler, dictator, or caudillo of the Spanish state, Francisco Franco could not tolerate dissent. After the war had ended, he continued his policy of purging his country of enemies of his regime via executions ruled by military tribunals. Sources differ, but it is alleged that between 30,000 and 200,000 dissidents were executed by Franco's regime. Following the beginning of World War II in Europe, there was a debate as to whether Spain should join the Axis powers. On the 23rd of October 1940, Franco and Hitler met in southern France. Franco owed much to the Germans, but during that meeting he did not commit to active participation in the war. The decision was considered a wise one and defended by Francoist supporters over time. The Spanish military and industrial capabilities had been exhausted by the Civil War, and they were not in shape for fighting another conflict. However, a member of von Ribbentrop's staff, interviewed by the BBC, reported that there had been a previous meeting in Berlin. Ribbentrop had met with Franco's Foreign Affairs Minister Serrano Suñer. The minister proposed to join the Axis in exchange for a large chunk of North African territory to rebuild the Spanish Empire, but at that time the Germans had not been impressed by the offer. At that meeting in France, again, Franco offered his participation in the war in exchange for all of French Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Hitler could not accept these demands, and the negotiations did not progress. The Führer, he was furious. This is when he famously said that he'd rather have 4 teeth pulled out than another talk with Franco. Later in the war, Franco was astute enough to maintain an equidistant neutrality with both Axis and Allied powers. For example, on the one hand, he allowed Allied pilots down to Spanish territory to rejoin their countries, and he never made a move on Gibraltar. On the other hand, he allowed Italian Navy frogmen to launch raids on Gibraltar from Spanish ports. By 1941, he was maintaining good trade relations with the US and the UK, but in that summer, he allowed a contingent of 47,000 volunteers to join Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. This contingent, known as La Division Azul, or Blue Division, was recalled in October of 1943, when it was clear that the war on the Eastern Front was a lost cause for the Axis powers. This marked Franco's opportunistic shift towards the Allies in the latter part of the war. After the war, Franco came under considerable pressure to restore the monarchy. In 1947, Franco announced a referendum to let the Spanish people decide. The vote confirmed a preference for the monarchy. However, the ever-astute Franco, while accepting the decision, declared himself as a lifetime regent with the privilege of appointing a further regent or a new king before his death. Following the death of Alfonso XIII in 1941, the natural heir to the throne was his third son, Don Juan of Bourbon, Count of Barcelona. Don Juan's older brothers had both renounced their right to the throne. Franco, however, was under pressure from 2 components of his power base, the Falangist and the Carlist movements. The Falangists were anti-monarchic, while the Carlists supported another branch of the Bourbons. Franco managed to placate both sides by selecting as future king the son of Don Juan, named Juan Carlos. Reluctantly, Don Juan agreed, and in 1949, the 10-year-old Juan Carlos traveled to Madrid to begin his studies and training as future monarch. While planning for succession, Franco had to think about rebuilding his country, which was weakened by the war and it was internationally isolated. The international community sought suspicion in his regime, remnants of fascist dictatorships from before the war. In fact, Franco's regime did offer sanctuary to many former fascists and Nazis, a prime example being SS Commando Otto Skorzeny, who managed a thriving business in Madrid. Franco embarked on a project to reconcile the opposing factions of the Civil War, the Valley of the Fallen. This is a monumental shrine built over 20 years not far from Madrid. It is topped by a gigantic cross taller than the Eiffel Tower, and it houses the remnants of 50,000 nationalists and Republican soldiers. Franco's intention was to commemorate the fallen, heal the rift between enemies, and lay a promise not to engage in further civil conflict. The intention, it was good, although some sources claim that it was built thanks to forced labor of Republican prisoners. Looking externally, Franco sought to re-establish ties with the West. His strong anti-communism stance made him especially popular with the United States, and it backed Spain's entry into the United Nations in 1950. The relationship with the US was cemented in 1953. Franco and President Eisenhower signed an agreement that enabled the United States to establish 4 military bases in Spain. In return, Spain was allowed to join NATO. In the same year, Franco got recognition by the smallest, but by no means the most powerless state in the world, the Vatican. Pope Pius XII granted Franco the right to appoint Spanish bishops from a list of several candidates proposed by the Holy See. In 1956, Morocco gained independence after being a French protectorate. The Moroccan government demanded authority over the Sidi Ifni territory, one of the last remnants of Spanish possessions in North Africa. Franco denied this concession, as ever willing to preserve at least a slice of the empire. Morocco reacted by creating a Moroccan Liberation Army, which engaged the Spanish garrison in a series of skirmishes until the Generalissimo ordered the intervention of paratroopers from the motherland. The war, known as the Spanish Forgotten War, dragged on into 1958, with even the French Army and Air Force joining Franco in February. By April, the Moroccans had been defeated, but Spain was pressured by the UN and the US to hand back the region of Tafaya. Spain retained control of Sidi Ifni until 1969, when it returned the former colony to Morocco following a UN resolution. In 1963, Franco had launched a program to soften his totalitarian regime in a bid to further improve relationships with the West, and in particular the US. He terminated the activities of military tribunals and had them replaced with civilian courts. He also shut down the special courts created to trial communists and Freemasons. Other reforms included laws supporting a partial freedom of the press and freedom of worship. Until then, the regime had actively suppressed the activities of all opposition, left-wing parties, trade unions, and regional separatists who were very vocal, especially in the Basque Country and Catalonia. Franco's reforms and overtures to the West had succeeded in stabilizing the country and the economy. Repression of dissenters was toned down, but the Generalissimo still maintained a tough stance against separatism. In August of 1965, President Johnson asked for Spain's participation in the Vietnam War. The caudillo rejected the invitation, logically wary of engaging in guerrilla warfare in a faraway jungle, but he did order for a team of field medics to join the war. Meanwhile, Franco, his advisor, Luis Carrero Blanco, and Prince Juan Carlos were planning the succession. The plan was to formally reveal the Bourbon prince as future king in January of 1969, but this was delayed due to a series of terrorist attacks from the ETA, the Basque separatists. Finally, in July, Franco formally announced that Juan Carlos of Bourbon would succeed him as head of state and king of Spain. In a televised ceremony, the prince swore an oath of loyalty to the Caudillo and the nationalist movement. By 1973, Franco was 81 and not able to handle the day-to-day administration of his government. He appointed Carrero Blanco as prime minister, maintaining an active role in some foreign policy matters. Carrero Blanco's office was short-lived. On the 20th of December, his car was blown up by the ETA, and an explosion so violent that the car flew over a church and landed on a second-floor terrace. A macabre joke started to circulate in Spain, which roughly translates to "up with Spain, up with Franco, even higher than Carrero Blanco." The subsequent crackdown on the ETA led to 5 terrorists being sentenced to death and executed in September 1975. These death penalties caused massive demonstrations in Madrid, Lisbon, and the Basque city of San Sebastian, as well as international condemnation. Franco had firmly backed these and future executions. The demonstrations, even the jokes, all these were clear signs that times have definitely changed since the totalitarian days of the 1940s and 50s. The regime, regardless of the caudillo's age, was nearing its end. Generalissimo Francisco Franco Bahamonde had been a reluctant leader who had gained control on the back of his brother's schemes. He had been nostalgic of the empire, ready to bargain his country's entry into World War II to regain North Africa. He had been the ruthless Caudillo who did not tolerate opposition. And finally, he had been the astute politician who had sought to bring stability to a divided nation. Francisco Franco died on the 20th of November 1975 of natural causes. His last words were reported as, "I ask pardon of all my enemies, as I pardon with all my heart all those who declared themselves my enemy, although I did not consider them to be so. In his last conversation with Prime Minister Navarro, he asked for the Spanish people to rally around their new king, Juan Carlos, and to keep the lands of Spain united. The Spanish did give their support to Juan Carlos, who successfully led the transition to a full democracy. I'm aware that Francisco Franco and the civil war remain a divisive topic to this day in Spain, so before we end things today, I'll ask you to kindly not turn the comments section into a rhetoric battle. Why don't you use the comments instead to suggest another character from the civil war, maybe on the Republican side? And that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Please do.
¡Viva el rey! ¡Viva España!
Spain's King Felipe VI has been officially sworn in at a ceremony in front of Parliament in Madrid. With his wife, Queen Letizia, and his two daughters at his side, the 46-year-old pledged to unify the country and to work with its political leaders. As I carry out my duties, you will find in me a loyal head of state, he said, willing to listen, to understand, to warn, and to advise. I will also be someone who always defends our general interests. The former Olympic yachtsman also paid tribute to his father, Juan Carlos, who officially abdicated at midnight. He said his father's reign had been exceptional and he felt great gratitude and respect towards him. In an earlier ceremony to show the transfer of power, Juan Carlos symbolically took off his red sash, signifying his role as head of Spain's military, and put it around his son's waist. Spain's royal family will now hope a new king can lift their popularity in the country and mark a fresh start after a number of scandals.
Okay, hi everyone. So before I forget, let's do the Cyber Campus attendance. And we go to attendance, and here we are on week 5, add, and smart attendance, and your number is 209. 209 is your smart attendance number. Your smart attendance number is 209. And so I'll just let that run and go back to a discussion of Spain. National trauma. By the way, you know, of course, Juan Carlos, he was king emeritus after he abdicated to allow his son Felipe to become king. And then what was it, last year, I think, he got into another scandal. He's quite old. He's in his late 80s and involving money. And he fled Spain. He fled and he now lives in the United Arab Emirates in the Persian Gulf, in the United Arab Emirates under another Yangban ruler there in the United Arab Emirates. That emphasizes the importance of the Yangban in Spain, the aristocracy. King Felipe has a significant amount of power that he inherited from his father. He's leader of the armed forces, for example, with real authority over the armed forces. And the Yangban, the aristocracy in Spain, is still very powerful, still very influential. One person told me that, for example, they own a great deal of land. The aristocracy of Spain, the traditional aristocracy, the official aristocracy, the traditional noble families own a great deal of land. And as part of the common agricultural policy of the European Union, since they own a great deal of land, a great deal of agricultural land, these traditional aristocrats, nobles, receive a great deal of money from the European Union through the common agricultural policy because they're they use their land for farming, for agriculture, which is significant. So I showed you this video on the Spanish Civil War because I think that what I'm trying to highlight here in the presentation of a context to the detailed notes that are in the textbook is as I said earlier, the significance, to try to illustrate the significance of what Europeanization means in places like Greece and Spain, which Europeanization is supposed to be an antidote or a prescription medicine, to use an analogy from medicine, a prescription drug to treat national trauma, in the form of polarization and conflict in those countries. So you got a sense in that video that I was showing, that's a half an hour long. Let me highlight well, let me just show you the what's on the Wikipedia, because everything is on Wikipedia, right? Here's the Spanish. That's a different one I want to highlight. I wanted to highlight the Spanish Civil War, and I'm wondering if yeah, there it is, the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War is highlighted here. According to this website, around 500,000 people died in that conflict. That's close to half of 1% of the Spanish population. I mean, sorry, that's close to 4% of the Spanish population died in that war. 4%, it is a trauma which continues to this day in Spain. It's a trauma that is interesting to study because it is so controversial and so polarizing amongst the Spanish people. Like the Greek Civil War in Greece, people avoid talking about it. They avoid talking about it because of the awareness that they have of the vicious fighting that happened between Spaniards, that happened among their ancestors or people that are still alive. I mean, the Spanish Civil War was in the 1930s, so there are still people alive in Spain who remember the Spanish Civil War. And they remember that, you know, a family living in the same village did something horrible to a member of my family, for example. So they don't really want to talk about it, and it's not really talked about also in the chapter readings on Greece and Spain. It's referenced, of course. They talk about the Greek Civil War. They make one reference in that chapter to the Greek Civil War, and they make reference to Franco in the chapter on Spain, but they don't go into detail because it's considered to be such a traumatic, large, difficult issue to address that you can't really talk about it, obviously, in a chapter on Europeanization of Spain or Europeanization of Greece. But still, Europeanization of Spain or Europeanization of Greece has to be understood as being an antidote for dealing with national trauma that could produce more violence, more conflict. And the danger of that is still present in these countries, as we saw, for example, in Catalonia declaring independence from Spain, and the Spanish central government sending in the police to directly rule the province of Catalonia in response to that declaration of independence. And then those leaders of those Catalan political forces then fleeing Spain to go to Belgium and Germany, and to get elected into the European Parliament, one or two of them, and then the European Parliament deciding that they were going to strip the parliamentary immunity of those individuals from Catalonia who had won the election from Spain, from Catalonia to the European Parliament, because the Europeans understand or appreciate everything that I'm talking about here, that this is a highly, highly sensitive topic. And the Spanish military is watching closely and is concerned about maintaining the territorial unity of Spain, or the territorial integrity of Spain. So when you read the chapter about the autonomous communities, and there's a great deal of discussion in the chapter on Spain about the autonomous communities, the ACs, that's the context that is not really mentioned highly intensively in that chapter, that not all of them, but at least two of them, about the Basque country and Catalonia, they have a history of militant commitment to independence from Spain. And the Basques, as you saw in that video, were killing and fighting the Spanish police as recently into the 1990s. they killed some Spanish police officers. They have since declared ceasefire. But that is the context for understanding this discussion of the role of the autonomous communities, the provinces of Spain, which somebody reading that chapter on Spain should know. You should know about the history of the Spanish Civil War, about Catalan nationalism, Basque nationalism, terrorism. That's the context for which we understand Europeanization. And remember, European Union is supposed to be a peace strategy for Europe. It's supposed to be a peace strategy to mitigate the drive for vengeance, to overcome the hatreds, to build something bigger beyond focus on the past. And so, and that's the context for understanding what you're reading about in those chapters and in all the chapters. By the way, I know the Catholic University of Korea has a vibrant exchange program. I know at least a couple students that have gone to study in Spain. As you got a sense that Spain is a very Catholic country, partly because of the victory of Franco in the Spanish Civil War. So there is a connection between the Catholic University of Korea and obviously and Catholic universities around the world, including Catholic universities in Spain. But before I go on, I want to also mention something about the European Union as a peace strategy, that the European Union is supposed to be a strategy for peace in Europe. And that's a problematic issue, right? It's a problematic issue from my point of view, because I think it's not possible to have peace in Europe unless you understand or appreciate the role of Russia in Europe. The prevailing view, not the only view, but the dominant political view in Moscow, in Vladimir Putin's government in Russia, in Moscow, is that the European Union is an instrument or tool of the United States. That the European Union is the civilian side of the North Atlantic Alliance dominated by the United States. That it's supposed to be a tool for orchestrating and organizing the civilian power capabilities, the economic and political influence capabilities of the American allies to pursue American objectives. And as I said in previous classes, right, the dominant view, not the only view, but the dominant political view in Washington is that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and that of course NATO and the civilian side of Euro-Atlantic integration, the European Union, of course, it's a source, it's an instrument for peace because it helped contain the Soviet Union, and because the Soviet Union could not expand, and it needed to expand, like Nazi Germany needed to expand in order to stay in power, because those kinds of regimes supposedly need imperial glory and conquest in order to continue to make the demands and control their people. If they cannot expand, and they can't get imperial glory and conquest. So sooner or later they're going to collapse. And that's why containment supposedly was successful in the prevailing view today in the United States. So of course, yes, from that perspective, the European Union helped win the Cold War against the Soviet Union. But if you think that basically the Cold War, if I think the Cold War is basically more of a conflict based upon mutual fear, the Soviet Union was trying to contain the United States, seeing the United States and capitalism as generally as aggressive and dangerous and imperialistic, represented by the United States and earlier also by London, right after World War II. And the Soviet Union saw the Americans and capitalism in general as an aggressive imperialist force, the way the Americans saw the Soviet Union under Stalin as an aggressive imperialist force. Then the Cold War was based upon mutual misperception of threat, right? I'm trying to contain an enemy that I think wants to hurt me, so I have to show that enemy that I have the will and determination to resist. And so I'm very belligerent and assertive in places like Korea and Vietnam and around the whole world during the Cold War, in the covert and not so covert struggle between the CIA and the KGB. The best defense is a good offense, right? And the Soviet Union may have been doing the same thing, although not as belligerently as the United States, but they still were assertive and asserting their interests because, again, they didn't want to be encircled and destroyed by the capitalists represented by the United States. So the reason I mention this is because I think I keep coming back to this notion. If the European Union is a peace strategy, then we still have to talk about what was the Cold War, because the Cold War is the foundation for so much of this discussion that's often unspoken and it's not explicitly criticized. And this came up. The reason I mention this is because yesterday morning, there was a Zoom conference at 2 a.m. in the morning our time here in Korea with this individual, Georgi Perinsky, who is a Bulgarian politician who was in the European Parliament from the former Communist Party of Bulgaria, then today the Bulgarian Socialist Party. And he spoke for 2 hours about what the European Parliament was doing and what his role was in the European Parliament. And he was an important figure. And he made a comment during this 2-hour Zoom conference last night, yesterday morning, early in the morning, that there was a lot of grumbling in Brussels, a lot of resentment among other parliamentarians in Brussels. And he didn't say who. I assume among the left of center members of the European Parliament, that the expansion of the European Union into Eastern Europe happened too quickly. And it happened too quickly because the Americans were demanding it. The Americans demanded, he said, the Americans were demanding that expansion. And can you see? I want to make sure you can see. I want to make sure that you can see my share screen here. Yes, this is the individual I'm talking about, Georgi Perinsky. And he said that the Americans, from the view of some members of the European Parliament, were grumbling that the expansion of the European Union happened too quickly and too fast into the former communist countries, the Eastern Europe, because of the pressure of the United States. The United States pressured the European Union to expand, which goes to confirm, this notion, if it's true, or at least the view of him, that the European Union basically exists as serves the interest of the United States. And if you're Vladimir Putin in Moscow, that means that the expansion of the European Union through association agreements and possibly eventually membership for countries like Ukraine and Georgia that had been republics in the old Soviet Union, that might be seen as threatening and so and dangerous. Because of course the dominant view in Moscow was not that the Soviet Union was trying to conquer the world. That's not the dominant view in Moscow, at least it's not the only view, right? But it is the dominant view in the United States, in Washington. And so, and I mention this because there's an upsurge in fighting in going on as we speak in Ukraine. I think I have the message highlighted here, if I can find it here. Where is it here? Yeah, here it is. I won't go into it here because this is our short class and we don't have too much time. It's a news report about how there's been an upsurge in fighting in Ukraine over the last week. This is from yesterday, right? Or 2 days ago in the New York Times. 4 Ukrainian soldiers were killed. The Russians are moving forces to the border, more Russian army military units to the border with Ukraine. The conflict is escalating between Russia and Ukraine, and four Ukrainian soldiers were killed in the last week. Artillery shelling has increased. So again, we raise this notion because the European Union claims to be a peace strategy. And certainly to have peace in Europe, it's necessary to understand the relationship of European Union and NATO to Russia, because that's all part of Europe, Ukraine and European Russia, right? So that's the context for this discussion that we're having. And again, I cover this discussion because I want to again try to make emotionally interesting the detailed notes that are evident in the textbook, and so let me go back to the lesson plan here, and if I can find it amongst all of these notes that I have here, and so I have to go back to lesson plan, and so yes, so. And okay, now to link in the discussion about Franco and the others to somebody give this person the number here. You're going to get it from the other student. What is the attendance number? Somebody send out the attendance number to Subin Pak. Okay, so back to the what is the attendance number? I don't know. Somebody tell what the attendance number. I don't know what it was. Okay, so let me go back to the notes. So the link to the discussion on Franco is, for example, there's a lot of discussion in the book regarding the People's Party in Spain, and the People's Party is the conservative right-wing party in Spain, the main right-wing party in Spain. And there's a lot of discussion in that chapter on Spain about the Prime Minister of Jose Maria Aznar, or formerly the President of the Council of Ministers of the Spanish government, which we just call the Prime Minister, but officially his name was the President of the Council of Ministers, but it's the Prime Minister, right? And he was the leader of the People's Party, and this is the successor party to the right-wing movement in Spain that developed after Franco died. Its supporters in Spain of the People's Party view the Franco regime as a positive time in Spain. That Spain went from being a poor, poverty-stricken country to becoming moderately well off by the time it applied to join the European Union when Franco died in 1975, and then immediately moved to try to join the European Economic Community. And this party is a dominant party in Spain. So there are a lot of people that are sympathetic to Franco, that are sympathetic to not to the killing and death, but to the order and development that they credit Franco and his supporters bringing to Spain. And particularly when, of course, everyone is talking about how evil and terrible communist totalitarian regimes were in Soviet Union and China and in their allies, for example, in North Korea, right? That Franco did terrible things, but it was a terrible world. And the world was moving towards a fascist dictatorships, and he did what he could do to, the point is that if you are a supporter or sympathetic to what Franco happened in Spain under at least the last 30 years of Franco's rule, or 40 years, because he ruled from the mid-1930s until he died in his sleep in 1975, you could rationalize how in a terrible world that going through World War II and through the Cold War, Spain was not invaded. Well, it was invaded. Of course, the Italian fascists and the Germans helped put Franco in power. But of course, Stalin intervened on the other side. Joseph Stalin supported the Republicans. And so the point is that this party is very important, and this individual was a very important individual in Spain and in the European Union, because the point is made in the textbook about how while he was in office in the late 1990s to the mid 2000s, he represented, in a sense, the right wing in the European Union among the big countries, among the bigger countries, right? At this time, of course, you have Tony Blair of the Labour Party in power in Britain, and you have the Socialist Party powerful in France, and you have left of center parties in power at different times in Italy. That his stable government, and he represented the more conservative side of European politics, and that was an achievement for Spain. Again, delivered by him, that Spain became a more influential actor in the European Union not long after it joined in the late 1980s. In 1986, I think it officially joined the European Economic Community, which then became, of course, the European Union. So that's the legacy of Franco. And I just wanted to highlight how, in the view of many people, Franco is admired today because he's charismatic. I mean, he is seen, particularly among religious people, as having saved the church from radical. I'm not saying I agree with this point of view, but the point is that Spain is a very polarized society. And I think I told this story once before. This is our short class, so I can't speak too much about it. But I was really surprised, in 2006 or 2007, I went to Barcelona, Catalonia, for a conference by the International Society for Political Psychology. And the theme of this academic conference for the International Society for Political Psychology was post-conflict reconciliation. And so the whole conference themes were reconciliation commissions, truth and reconciliation commissions, entities for examining the past produce these national traumas, investigating them, understanding what happened, so that there's some discussion of what happened in these countries. And like there's been some discussion about this in Korea, right? Here is the report that I mentioned in class about how South Korea under this president was beginning to investigate in Korea what happened under the Japanese collaborators, and taking and seizing their property, investigating what happened, and because of course, like also in Spain, this period in Korea was not publicly discussed much because it's dangerous, it's polarizing, it's difficult, it's a national trauma. So the whole theme of this conference was national trauma and truth and reconciliation efforts after to investigate what happened in the past. And so I attended for the 3-day conference at noon around lunchtime. There was a presenter who talked from the Spanish universities, talked in Spanish, and I listened to the English translation on headphones about research on Truth and Reconciliation Commission activities in different countries, in Guatemala, in South Africa, in other countries, under the United Nations, under other international bodies. And I went to each one, and nobody at these presentations by these Spanish professors discussed about what was happening in Spain. As they were speaking right there at that time, the Spanish Congress of Deputies was passing legislation to create a national investigative body to investigate the violence and atrocities and killings that happened in the Spanish Civil War. At the same time, and none of those professors, none of those 3 professors that made those presentations over 3 days mentioned that. Didn't talk about what was going on in Spain. Now, what do you make? What sense do you make of that? My sense was they didn't want to talk about it because it's too difficult. They think it's too dangerous. It's too polarizing. They could get in trouble. They could get in trouble if they talk to an international audience with people like me and around the world about this. But the whole conference was on this topic. So that gives you an indicator about the memory and the legacy of Franco. And keep in mind, there was no revolution in Spain. There was really no revolution in Greece, right? It was suppressed. There was no successful revolution, right? It was suppressed like it was suppressed in Greece. And Franco just died in his sleep. He wasn't removed from office. There wasn't an uprising and street demonstration that caused him to resign. He just died peacefully in his sleep, and Juan Carlos became the new head of state. So they haven't had a reckoning, and they're trying to have a reckoning. At that time, they passed legislation I mentioned under the, I think it was under the socialist government. I can't remember the name of the socialist prime minister at the time. And then that socialist government lost power to the People's Party, the conservatives, in an election, and the People's Party government cut off funding for that investigative body. And so the work stopped, because they didn't have any money from the government to support their investigation. Now, in the last couple of years, since the socialists have come back into office, they have spent the money, they have allocated the money to restarting those investigations. And as I mentioned, only like last week or 2 weeks ago, the government moved the bones of Francisco Franco from that Valley of the Fallen monument that's discussed in that video at the end. That they move his remains to his family's cemetery. Okay, so national trauma is the theme, and so let me stop share, and so the let me go back now. Let me open the notes. So that's the context for this discussion on Spain, and so let me go chapter 7, because these are the combined notes. In chapter 7, Spain. So let me go make sure I share screen. And so again, you Koreans have an intuitive emotional understanding of the complexities of these topics and the emotions that involve with them because of your own national trauma. And And so that is, when we say the European Union is a peace strategy, it has to deal with that national trauma. And you see, they have to make difficult choices. Like, for example, when the European Parliament decides that this individual, Puigdemont, Carlos Puigdemont, who was elected to the European Parliament, they stripped his European Parliament legal immunity from persecution, from prosecution. And they chose to do that, partly because they want to keep Spain polarization from intensifying. Like, we're not going to be, the European Union does not want to be associated with the dismemberment of Spain, that European integration allowed Catalonian nationalists to dream the dream of independence because they don't need Spain. They have all of the European Union to have access for their economy and for their exports. And that the European Union somehow encouraged Catalan nationalism. They do not want to be associated with that. Okay, so what do we want to cover? There's a lot to cover here, obviously, in these notes. Portugal and Spain. Portugal had a Portuguese version of Franco's regime in power in Spain. Both of those, Franco's regime and the Salazar regime in Portugal, were a mix of traditional conservative Catholic, traditional conservative movement and authoritarian populist movement. So you saw the Spanish Francoists using the stiff-arm salute. Yeah, there were elements of authoritarian populism, but there were also strong elements of authoritarian conservatism, emphasizing, for example, the role of the church. And the church under Pius XII, Pope Pius XII, they admired Franco. I mean, this was, during the Cold War, of course, this was a positive regime. I mean, Franco persecuted communists, and he emphasized the role of the church. And there were a lot of powerful individuals that are Catholic activists in the group called Opus Dei, work of God. You may have heard of it. That were economic advisors to Franco, that carried out the reforms that allowed Spain to develop relatively rapidly. Like the Chicago School boys played a role. The so-called Chicago School of Economics and economists were advising Pinochet in Chile. And I should mention this also. One academic, the professor, president of the American University in Bulgaria, told me that after Franco defeated the leftists in Spain in the 1930s, they fled to places to Latin America, including heavily to Chile. And that a lot of those radical leftists in Chile played an important role in the Marxist socialist movement that led to the election of Salvador Allende, the Marxist president of Chile in 1970. And to implement socialism in Chile. And then the U.S. responded, allying with the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class in Chile. The CIA allied with that faction, that sector of society, against the populist socialists in Chile to carry out a coup that led to the rise to power of Augusto Pinochet, a Chilean version of Pinochet, of Franco, if you will, in 1973. And he worked to implement economic reforms with advice from University of Chicago economists trained at the University of Chicago in the United States. That's why they're called the Chicago Boys. And Milton Friedman went there and advised the government and other governments as well. And I should mention that when Pinochet came to power, a lot of those leftists in Chile, they went to East Germany, communist East Germany. Erich Honecker, the communist dictator in East Germany, welcomed them to Germany, to East Germany, to communist Germany after 1973. And so when the communist regime in East Germany collapsed in fall 1989, there was this political dilemma of what to do with Erich Honecker, the communist dictator of East Germany. And the Chilean government welcomed him to come to Chile because he had welcomed the Chilean refugees fleeing Pinochet, asylum seekers fleeing the persecution under the right-wing dictatorship, military dictatorship in Chile, who went to East Germany. They allowed him to come to Chile, and Erich Honecker died in Chile, finally. So, as I already mentioned, Franco was isolated, but not too much. Spain was already part of NATO because the Cold War, and the fear that we have bigger problems that when happened in the 1930s and 40s, where the prevailing view in the United States was that the Soviet Union was a new danger, a new threat. So Spain was able to join the NATO, and it had American military bases there under Franco, so it wasn't too isolated. But modern Spain has undergone its fastest transformation under a combination of EU membership, democracy, and political decentralization. Decentralization meaning allowing the provinces, the autonomous communities, the ACs, as they're called in the book, the AC for autonomous community, to have more authority. So Spain is, in a sense, a federal state. Before the 2008 financial crisis, Spain was among the fastest growing economies in the European Union. This country, about 40 million people. It achieved equality with the average income of the West European countries. It always had a problem of high levels of unemployment, that ludicrously high levels, officially high levels of unemployment, so high that economists would say, well, we can't take those numbers as being really valid, because of course, if you become officially unemployed, you're allowed to get a pension, an unemployment compensation support benefit from the state. So a lot of people were officially unemployed, but they were working unofficially, as we say in American English, being paid under the table, paid unofficially, so that it's not declared and they're not taxed on it. But still, I mean, Spain had undergone an economic transformation. But beginning before the European Union, before it joined the European Union, but the European Union accelerated that political transformation. Keep in mind, Spain did not have an environmental policy under Franco. It basically developed its entire environmental protection policy while it became a member of the European Union. And of course, all the world's talking about environmental policy. Many Spanish regional and local governments have exploited new modes of governance and participate in European networks which aid the sharing of experience, knowledge, and interests. Keep in mind, as you read those statements, that this fear of Catalan and Basque separatism was one of the justifications that Franco used to justify his fighting in the Civil War and his victory, right? So when we talk about decentralization in Spain, this is a sensitive topic for Spanish people. By 2008, Spain was no longer a country of immigration. It had been a country that sent its poor abroad. It no longer was doing that and was accepting poor people. So there's a lot of, for example, Romanians who went to work in the Spanish construction industry, the construction bubble, banking finance of construction for hotels and vacation homes, particularly was a source of the economic Great Recession in Spain, obviously. When there was a real estate bubble, and lots of people were coming from Eastern Europe, particularly like countries like Romania, which speak a Latin-based language like Spanish, came to Spain. And it returned, and from between 1986 and 2010, it turned to the largest recipient of immigrants into the European Union. Keep in mind also, you got a sense in that discussion about Franco and his interest in Spain's empire, right? This role of empires and imperial memory in United Kingdom and also in Spain is really important for understanding the symbolic content and ideologies that associate with British nationalism or Spanish nationalism. Spain wants to be a global leader. It wants to exploit, in a sense, its legacy of its vast empire that it began under Christopher Columbus in 1492 to occupy most of America and other places, and that it was humiliated by the Americans of all actors in the Spanish-American War, by which the Americans obtained Guam, Puerto Rico, and Philippines, where and Cuba as a protectorate, and that humiliation spurred or instigated or intensified political conflicts within Spain, and that's implied in that video I showed you, right? But okay, now to jump to the European Union era, Spain is the second largest private source of investor in Latin America in 1996 to 2008, closely following the United States as a source of foreign direct investment in all of Latin America. This country of 40 million people, right? And that was something that Aznar, the all the Spanish governments, but particularly Aznar, really emphasized that they wanted the European Union to be more open to cooperation and including immigration from Latin American countries to the European Union. And the European Union members have played an important role in the modernization and development of Spanish democracy. And Spain's European politics has displayed a nationwide consensus, and rather than being based upon party differences as a source of political polarization in Spain. And that existed up until at least the Maastricht Treaty, and the nationalist parties as well, the Catalan and Basque parties, supported Spain's entry into the European Union. The adjustment of Spain to joining the European Union, maybe it's not emphasized sufficiently. When I was at the American University in Bulgaria, Bulgaria was beginning the process of trying to join the European Union, there were these, I think I mentioned in another class that there were these summer intensive study programs for civil servants in Bulgaria and other countries to study in English intensively about the European Union. And there was an individual who came representing a Spanish academic foundation. And he claims that the compromises that Spain had to adopt in terms of its political economy and in terms of the structure of its businesses and farms and industry include the fact that Spanish dairy farming was too inefficient compared to the dairy farming, dairy agriculture in other European economic community countries. So Spain, he claimed, basically lost its dairy farming industry because it was too inefficient. If it's going to be integrated with the European economic community, Spain could not support dairy farming. So, I mean, the point is that there's a lot of emphasis on the benefits of joining the European Union, about Spain's access to the structural and European Union structural and cohesion funds, the money that the European Union has spent between 1989 and 2006, that Spain received over a total of 100 billion euros spent to develop the poorer regions of Spain. But there was also a lot of disruption, of dislocation, of established businesses and programs that could not continue, and policies and behaviors that could not continue with Spain in the European Union. But that's not really discussed. But of course, there was a lot of benefits, right? So when Spain joined the European Economic Community in 1986, its per capita GDP per capita was 69% of the EU average. At the beginning of the Great Recession, it was 100%. It had met the average. Of course, then Spain was confronted by the fact that with the enlargement of the European Union into Eastern Europe, the former communist countries, these countries are much poorer than Spain, much poorer than Spain. And so they're going to get access, they're going to get, according to the formula that's used to allocate those funds, including also the agricultural policy, common agricultural policy subsidies, is going to have to shift to the much poorer regions of Eastern Europe. I mean, I learned when I was in Poland that Poland's per capita income was half, per capita GDP was half what Spain's was. So, and Poland is the same population size as Spain. So the Spanish have had to deal with that fact that they, if they're going to accept the expansion of the European Union into Eastern Europe, that they're going to have to give up much of their subsidies. Of course, they're not going to willingly give it up. So they would fight, as discussed politically. They would argue and negotiate in the budget framework negotiations of the European Union that they would continue to receive a disproportionate share of the budget allocations. But this cannot continue because of the dire conditions in the other countries. They have continued to receive those budget allocations, but that's with time limits, with certain time limits. And now we have the coronavirus impact, which we'll see how that impacts Spain and the rest of the European Union in terms of the Europeanization of these countries under this latest great crisis confronting the European integration movement. And as someone is emphasized throughout the book, right, the textbook, European Union evolves through crises. So, you know, the Spanish administration faced major challenges in incorporating and implementing the very large amount of the acquis communautaire. That's the French term for the collection of laws that have been adopted since 1951 that Spain had to incorporate into its own national law by the time it joins and continuing after joining in 1986. And that requires a strong, effective administrative state. And I think one can say that that was one of the legacies of pre-modern, of pre-European Union Spain, that they had a relatively effective state administration compared, say, for example, to the Italian administration, or certainly the Greek administration. You've been reading this week about the really difficult to comprehend weakness of the Greek civil service as manifest in the form of corruption. And that leads us to our debate topic. Who's more modern, South Korea, Greece, or Spain? So we need to stop there and go to our debate topic. And so let me go to the debate topic and open up the debate topic. And oh geez, we're running out of time. They're actually short. So let's divide up into two groups. And the second person, each group one will be pro, group two will be con. And open all rooms. And so please join the groups. Group one, you are pro. In Hyuk Chon, you are the chairperson. Room two, you are con. Yoon Sok Chu, you are the chairperson. So please join your groups. And group one, you are pro. Group two, you are con on the debate topic. And just to remind us about what the debate topic is. Screen share and the debate topic. So group one is pro on this topic. To South Korea is more modern than Greece and Spain. And group two is con. Okay, so prepare to make a statement. You have 3 minutes to prepare a statement on this topic. And so let me go back to the screen share, and so you can see the screen share. And okay, so In Hyuk Chon, you are the chairperson, and Yoon Sok Chu, you are the chairperson for con. So talk amongst yourselves.
아직 다 안 오셨.
저희 다 온 것 같아요.
아,
교수님
더 오셨나요?
네.
저는 저 같은 경우는 저도 이거 콘 했었거든요.
아, 네.
그냥 솔직히 말해서 원래 프로가 맞긴 한 것 같은데, 근데 콘 했는데 재미로.
Okay, so who's going to speak first? Heads pro, tails con will speak first. And it is heads pro. So In Hyuk Chon, what is your pro statement?
Sorry, Professor, we can't discuss that enough times. Sorry.
What about group two, Yoon Sok Chu?
Okay, actually our group had two people, and I wrote down my essay like I was pro, and my teammate was the con. So his argument was that one might argue that South Korea is more modern than two nations, but actually political situation in South Korea is now really corrupted, and at least Greece and Spain is trying to be better than current situation. So okay, so um, we can be more modern than Greece and Spain now, but later on we can be more corrupted than those two countries in the political situation.
Yeah, I shared with you, there's no simple answer to the question. The question is very broad and provocative. And I mentioned this in my comments on your paragraphs, right? It's just to get us talking and discussing these notions. There's different ways to go about defining what modern is. It depends on what you're interested in studying. I highlighted how Transparency International, that famous non-governmental organization, claims that Korea is less corrupt than Greece, but about the same as Spain. I think they rank Spain number 32 on the list of 180 countries in terms of corruption, and South Korea as 33, according to Transparency International. Greece is like 52 or 53 or something like that, as I recall. But of course, and I also mentioned how the world was shocked when the Sewol ferry disaster happened, because that Sewol ferry disaster killed all of those young people, happened because of extensive corruption and nepotism in the Korean maritime shipping industry and in the Coast Guard and the government bureaucracies that are supposed to regulate it. So if you think that basically corruption is an indicator of a weak state because of parochial mindset, a focus on private interest at the public expense, as we define corruption in that quote from Transparency International at the beginning of last class, yeah, that's one way of looking at it. On the other hand, you don't have a traditional Yangban. You don't have a traditional aristocracy dominating South Korean society the way you do unofficially in Greece and officially in Spain, right? An aristocracy. So there's different ways to go about defining it. But yeah, corruption obviously is an issue. And so we only have 1 minute left in class. So I want to go back to Pro. Who would like to speak for Pro out of group one? Im Hyuk-jun, can you say something?
Okay, so yeah, okay. Actually, I also that in my opinion, actually, mine is con, but in the pro, if we define modernity is in the authority part, sorry,
Anybody want to help him?
sorry.
Anybody want to help Pro in group one?
I'll speak, sir.
Okay.
So actually my opinion on the essay was con, but also at first I was thinking about pro. What would, if people actually agree with the statement, what do people think? And I believe that people would define modern as a systematic and economically, and in a more of a like technical way of modernized. But I believe in that sense, Korea is modernized, therefore would agree with the statement. Because if you see, many Koreans do believe that internet in Korea is the fastest, and I also actually agree with that. And we have Samsung, one of the best electronic company.
Yeah.
And so on, and also a lot of people actually is amazed by the Korea's systemized public transportation.
I like
so
that.
those kind of those kind of things should
Yeah, I mean, in fact, if you define modernity as being basically you assign status and dignity and status and honor in society based on perceived levels of achievement versus a scriptive traditional authority in which I give you status and respect because you are a Yangban, you are traditionally, the members of your family are your traditional kings. And so of course I give you high status because you were born into that position. That's traditional, ascriptive non-modern authority. So yeah, that's one way. Okay, well, we're just about out of time here, and let me go back now to the vote, and so let's see. You please vote. I think it's now running, so please vote on whether or not you think to South Korea is more modern than Greece and Spain. And you have 1 minute. Vote. We have 3 more people need to vote. Nobody's going to vote pro?
You want to try refreshing the screen, sir?
Oh, thank you. Con, oh, nobody's still going to vote pro. That's interesting. Let me refresh again. Thank you for reminding me. One more person. Well, I guess that's about it. So I'm going to close it down, and that's all. So anybody have any questions? Oh, so on Monday, we are going to have class, but only online because Monday is a holiday, so the staff won't be here. So I was directed to have online class like this for Monday's 2-hour class, okay?
Okay.
Okay, and bye.